Good morning, everybody. Today is going to be a long day for some of us. There's a lot to take in. We have CPC in the house. I don't know where they are. They might have already left. I'm not sure, but they're in the house and they're doing great work, and they've shared with us already. Thanks, Angie, for doing that. At the end of our service today, the elders have a special announcement that they're going to make. And later today, there's a little celebration, as you guys are so happy that I'm retiring. So that's. But before all of that, Jesus needs to be our focus. In fact, Jesus needs to be our focus throughout all of that. But this morning, I want us to really focus on Him. And today we're continuing the series called I Am, or What's in the Name, as we look at the I am statements that Jesus made recorded in the Gospel of John. And these statements tell us something about Jesus, and it helps us to understand who Jesus is. Beginning each statement with the phrase, I am, tells us even more. It's like an echo of the ancient name of God given to Moses as Moses stood at that burning bush and God spoke to him, and Moses says, who are you? And God's word was Yahweh in Hebrew, I am who I am. And so in these statements, Jesus is revealing different aspects of His character. But He's also helping us to identify Jesus as God. I don't know if any of you remember in 2015, a movie came out entitled The 33. And it was about an event that happened back in 2010. And I actually remember when that event took place. 33 miners were trapped in a Chilean mine over 2,000 feet below the surface. And for 17 days, no one knew whether they were dead or alive. And then, against all odds, rescuers were able to make contact, and a narrow shaft was drilled down to these miners. One of the first things they sent was a light so that they could see in that darkness. One of the miners later said, we didn't know how long we'd be down there, but the first time we saw that light, we knew there was hope. Friends, light changes everything. Jesus knew that, which is why in one of the darkest times in Israel's history, as they were enduring Roman occupation, in the middle of a dazzling religious festival, Jesus shouted out these words, I am the light of the world. Not a light. The light. Not temporary or symbolic light, but life-changing, world-altering light. Now, you know, there's still darkness in our world today. And in case you didn't know it, I'm telling you, there's still darkness. There's a lot of confusion. People have despair, and there's deception that Satan is just spreading, and there's loneliness and there's sin. People are groping around in the dark looking for direction and identity and peace. And the bold claim of Jesus is that He is the only light that pierces that kind of darkness. And too many people think that the light is found in some self-help book or some success or spirituality without Christ. They might say, well, I'm a spiritual person. But without Christ, that doesn't make a difference. But those lights flicker and fade. Culture lights candles that burn out by the morning. Jesus alone offers the light of life. But here's what makes this statement from Jesus even more compelling. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus flipped the script and said, you are the light of the world, in His Sermon on the Mount. Now, how can that be? if Jesus is the light, how are we also the light? And so that brings us to our big idea for today, that Jesus is the light of the world, and we are called to reflect his light in a world that is still trapped in darkness. Think about that. Jesus is the light of the world, and we're called to reflect his light in this world that is still trapped in darkness. And the first thing we should recognize is that Jesus is the light that dispels the darkness. Jesus identified himself as the light of the world, just as John's gospel does in the opening verses of chapter 1. But in Matthew's gospel, in what is called the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus called us the light of the world. And we need to spend some time unpacking what this means. What is Jesus talking about? So in John 8:12, we read, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So Jesus made this statement really at a very dramatic setting. It was the final statement of his message on the last night of the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem. Now, people from all over Israel had come to celebrate the memory of God's blessings on their ancestors during their wandering in the wilderness after the Exodus from Egypt. Now, people lived in tents or shelters. For the week, they remembered the experience of their forefathers. During the Exodus, God had guided the Israelites by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire at night. Jesus spoke this during the Feast of Tabernacles and the illumination of the temple. 4 giant lamps lit up the Temple Mount, symbolizing God's presence as fire in the wilderness. And it's in this setting that Jesus declared he was that very light. To commemorate this guidance of God, there was a ceremony they called the Feast of Tabernacles. And during that feast, there was this ceremony called the illumination of the temple. And each night of the festival, 4 great candelabras were lit in the courtyard of the temple. And these were considered, again, a memorial to the light God had been to the people in the dark uncertainty as they were wandering through the wilderness. The moment of the illumination of these candelabras set off this great celebration of singing and dancing that lasted late into the night. Imagine the drama of Jesus stepping forward in that setting and calling out in a loud voice, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. It was as if he said God's presence was a pillar of fire for Moses and our ancestors. Now the presence is here in person. I am. Yahweh is here to be the light of life. These candles will go out by morning, but I am light that lasts and can never be diminished. I am God's light dispelling the darkness. Come, follow me, and you will walk in the light forever. The prophet Isaiah had foretold this in Isaiah 9:2. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Now that passage goes on with the familiar words of the prophecy of the Messiah. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. Jesus' reference to himself as light would have been unmistakable to the people who heard it, that they would have associated those comments with the promised Messiah. For us, it brings to mind the familiar words of the opening verses of John's Gospel. In verses 4 through 5, John wrote, "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Either way, the message is very clear. Jesus was identifying himself with the ancient image of God as light shining in the darkness. He had to know how that language would be heard and interpreted. Yahweh alone, the great I Am, is the creator and the bringer of light. Yahweh alone is the one we celebrate for illuminating our way through the wilderness with a pillar of fire in the night. Who is this who claims to be the light bringer again right here in our midst? And certainly that's how some of the religious leaders took his words. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel wrote of his time in Auschwitz. He wrote, "Even in that dark place, I remember a man who sang hymns and quoted scripture in the barracks. That man brought light into hell." What does this mean for us? When you follow Jesus, you will stop stumbling in the dark. You know, the world offers some light, but it's dim light. Jesus brings us full clarity. He opens our eyes to things we didn't recognize or understand. You don't have to guess where you're going with Jesus. Light leads the way. But friends, without Jesus, we're walking in shadows, while with him, we're walking in light. So don't just admire the light. Follow the light, which brings us to an invitation. Jesus invites us to be his light in the world. Now, Jesus uses the image of light, and it was an unmistakable image. And then something even more startling and unexpected happened as Jesus called his followers to be light. Now, this is possibly the greatest compliment Jesus could ever give to any of us. He described us in the same way he described himself. That he should equate himself with the light bringer is astounding enough, but it surely had the pilgrims at the feast in Jerusalem dumbfounded and confused. But now he says his followers have the same calling, and they have the same ability to bring light into the dark places of this world. The words of Matthew 5:14 are perhaps too familiar to us to have the same impact they did when they were originally spoken. At a minimum, this should give us pause to reflect. So let's read Matthew 5, beginning in verse 14. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. And in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Now, the Greek word for light here is phos, the same word used in John 8:12. Jesus passed his identity on to us, his followers. He doesn't say, make your own light. He says, reflect his light. And I want you to think about some qualities of light today. Light is a positive force rather than a negative force. You know, darkness is negative. It is the absence of light. You can't turn on the darkness or turn up the darkness. but you can only do that with light. It's a reminder that we should be known for what we are, what we stand for, not just for what we're against. And another thing, light casts a shadow larger than itself. And that speaks about influence. We may feel small, we may feel outnumbered in a culture that is increasingly secular and materialistic, but our influence can be greater than we imagine. Like a mustard seed or the yeast, metaphors that Jesus used to show the power of small things. We also think about it this way: the greater the darkness, the greater the impact of a single light. Like a candle in a cave. We don't need to be intimidated by darkness. We just need to keep shining the light of Christ. On April the 14th, 2003, there was a power outage across the East Coast, and one small town in New Jersey stayed lit. I mean, you could look down from the heavens and look down, and you'd see this one little spot that was lit up. Why? Well, their emergency grid was tied to solar panels, and in a blackout, they shone. In a dark world, our connection to Jesus keeps us glowing. Even when everything around us may seem dark, the way that we live, the way that we share our faith, that is a light. I believe Carolina Pregnancy Center is an organization of light. It is an organization about life. And I'm so glad that they were here today to share with us about that very important work. You know, Roe versus Wade may have been struck down, but there are still young women who are struggling with the decision about the life of their child. And that wonderful organization is there to help both women and men to recognize that life of that child and to offer them some positive options. And so I really encourage you, pick up your baby bottle before you leave today and just fill it. And if you'd rather, you can fill it with coins, but you could just fill it with a piece of paper with numbers on it, right? Now, we live in such a dark world that many people will claim that no child is viable until they're born into the world. They will claim that that baby is just an appendage. But friends, we know better, don't we? We know better. I'm grateful for those points of light in our culture, like the Carolina Pregnancy Center, that speak that truth, and they do it in love. So remember, we don't create the light, we reflect the light. You are made to shine. You're not made to hide. And friends, your light points people to the source, and that is Jesus. Even a small light makes a difference in some deep darkness. So I don't care. Maybe you're in an office where it just seems dark all the time. There's no other Christians there. And that can be very difficult to work in that environment. But listen, you be the light. You give positive words to people. You put your arm around them when you see that they're struggling. You pray for them. And maybe one day, those efforts to shine some light can bear some fruit. You see, the world is watching. Let them see God through your deeds. And finally, we must understand that light isn't meant to be hidden. In verse 15 of our text, it is very clear. Jesus said, people don't put a lamp and put it under a bowl. You know, they put it on its stand. It gives light to everyone in the house. So we got to think about this. Our purpose in the world is to be a visible source of light. We got to get out from under the bowl. Jesus didn't say, you are the light of the church. You know, go to church and let your light shine. No. The light must be out there in the world. If you're a follower of Jesus, people should notice in the way you speak, in the way you act, in the way you work and conduct your business, handle money, relate to others, even how we play golf, right? Even how we drive our cars. But that doesn't mean we wear our so-called righteousness on our shirt sleeves like a badge of honor for all people to see. It's not like we're patting ourselves on the back. I'm so good because I'm shining light. That's not what it's about. In fact, that's what Jesus criticized the Pharisees for. He called them whitewashed tombs, and that's not a very flattering picture. Their form of righteousness was only for show. But it also doesn't mean that we have to advertise our beliefs by some kind of outward adornment. I mean, we don't have to wear a Jesus t-shirt or bumper stickers and things. Those things aren't bad or wrong, but they don't really show light. I mean, those are just words. Sometimes I fear they disguise the fact that we aren't really Christ-like where it really counts. We are to be known for the fruit of our lives, for the good that we do to help others. But some Christians seem to think if we can't be holy, let's at least be weird. You know, that's not what Jesus is calling us to do. And that leads us to the next thought, be an attractive source of light. And I'm not talking about I mean, I would fail at that immediately if I'm talking about looks, okay? Let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, in those words, there were two words for good in Greek. Agathos, which means good in quality or excellence, and kalos, which means something is not only excellent, it is also beautiful and attractive. Kalos is the word that Jesus used there. Too much so-called goodness is hard and it can be cold. It can come across as self-righteous legalism. Mark Twain once described a man as a good man in the worst sense of the word. And sometimes the world sees that and they're repelled by that sort of religion. We're not going out there to be like goody two-shoes. But when Jesus was here in the flesh, why were people attracted to him? It's because he was genuine. He genuinely had compassion for people. He genuinely reached out and tried to help people. The only people who were not attracted to Jesus were the self-righteous, legalistic religionists. The ones who looked at their goodness as being hard and cold. Like their goodness was based on, check marks on all the deeds or all the things and not breaking the law and all of those things. Our light should be warm and attractive, more like a fireplace, right? So be a light that calls attention to God, not to yourself. Again, that's what Jesus was saying in verse 16, so that people will see those good deeds and praise God. We're not doing it for praise for ourselves. When we do a good thing in our community, it ought not to be, hey, look at me, I'm so good. It ought to be, look at Jesus. Everything we do should reflect back to Jesus. We should be a spotlight aimed at God. What spotlight calls attention to itself? Only a broken one, right? And that gives us the proper purpose for our good works. It's not for gaining righteousness. We can't earn God's favor with good works. It's not for giving praise to God. Or it is for giving praise to God. I'm sorry. Our good works glorify God. We have a chance next week to make a difference in our community. Hasten International is having a medical clinic right here on our grounds. We've been getting volunteers to help. We've got some doctors and nurses and dentists and other volunteers that are coming out. And we need people to come out and receive those blessings. So if you know people who need to see a doctor, who need some basic dental care, invite them. Let them know. Get the word out. Volunteer to help if you haven't already. You see, shining our light for Jesus can be as simple as that. Just helping someone. Helping people and loving people. That light will make a difference. During World War II's London Blitz, families had to black out their windows to prevent bombers from spotting their houses. But even if one light peeked through the curtain, it became a target from up high. You see, darkness conceals things, but light reveals. It cannot be ignored. So I want to challenge you, friends. Don't hide your light so that you blend in with the darkness around you. We are not here to fit in. We are here to stand out. So don't let fear dim your faith. Friends, you weren't meant to be invisible. Hidden light helps no one. So your workplace and your school and your neighborhood needs your light to reflect back to Jesus. Let them see Jesus through your bold and radiant love. I want to close with a story I heard a long time ago. Actually, Tony Campolo told the story of a drunk who was miraculously converted at a Bowery mission in New York many, many years ago. Now, Joe was known throughout the Bowery as the worst kind of wino, a hopeless derelict of a man living on borrowed time. But following his conversion, everything changed. Joe became the most caring person that anyone associated with the mission had ever known. He spent his days and nights hanging out at the hall, not balking at even the lowliest job. He mopped up vomit and urine and cleaned up drunks, whatever their condition. He considered nothing too demeaning for himself. One evening, when the director of the mission was delivering his evening evangelistic message to the usual crowd of still and sullen men, their heads hung in penitence and exhaustion, there was one man who looked up, and he came down the aisle to the altar, and he knelt to pray, and he was crying out to God to help him change. And this repentant drunk kept shouting, oh God, make me like Joe. Make me like Joe. Make me like Joe. And the director of the mission leaned over and he said to the man, son, I think it'd be better if you prayed, make me like Jesus. And the man looked up at the director and he had sort of a questioning look on his face and he said, is he like Joe? Joe was introducing him to Jesus. Jesus is the light of the world, but he told us that we are to reflect his light. So what kind of light are you shining in your corner of the world? When Jesus said, I am the light of the world, he wasn't offering a warm sentiment, he was offering salvation. And when he said, you are the light of the world, he wasn't just giving us a compliment, he was giving us a commission. You are to be light bearers in a dark world. You are torches in a storm. You are candles in a cave. So let our light shine and reflect it back to Jesus. Now I have two questions that I want you to think about before we get into our communion time. Where is the darkness trying to creep into your life? And will you invite Jesus to shine into it? And the second question is, who in your life needs to see the light of Jesus shining through you this week? I want you to think about those questions. And then in just a moment, we will join together for our communion.